Welcome to TrueRadar. Before we begin tonight, take a slow, deliberate breath. Let the heavy, complicated thoughts of the day slip away, leaving them far behind you. Feel the tension physically uncoiling from your shoulders, the muscles in your jaw relaxing, your body sinking deeper and heavier into the warmth of your mattress. Pull the blankets up around you, sealing out the chill of the world. You are entirely safe here. Close your eyes. Let the steady, rhythmic, and unrelenting sound of the rain against the glass become the only thing that matters, washing away the noise. As we unlock a door hidden deep in the past, there is a profound, suffocating silence that falls over the world during a heavy winter snow. It is a silence that swallows the chaotic sounds of the city, dampens the sharp edges of the landscape, and buries everything beneath a blinding, heavy white. In November of 1946, a bitter, unforgiving cold had settled over the town of Burlington, Vermont. The wind blowing off the frozen expanse of Lake Champlain carried a biting chill, rattling the frosted window panes of the Elizabeth Lund home for unwed mothers. Inside this brick fortress, separated from the freezing world by thick, unyielding walls, a 22-year-old woman named Eleanor Louise Cowell was waiting for her life to permanently change. In the years immediately following the Second World War, society operated under a rigid, uncompromising moral architecture. An out-of-wedlock pregnancy was a secret capable of shattering a family's reputation, spoken of only in hushed, judgmental whispers, in church pews and grocery store aisles. Louise, terrified, isolated, and carrying the heavy weight of her family's shame, had been sent away from her home in Pennsylvania to weather the physical and emotional toll of her pregnancy entirely alone. On the 24th of November, as the snow drifted against the walls of the maternity home, she delivered a baby boy. Lying in the quiet, sterile room, listening to the soft breathing of the newborn resting in his small bassinet, the young mother was forced to confront a terrifying reality. She could not simply return to her deeply religious family with a fatherless child without inviting absolute ruin. Wrapped in heavy woolen blankets to protect his fragile lungs from the freezing Vermont winter, the infant was carried aboard a southbound train. The journey to Philadelphia was a long, rhythmic procession of dread. The heavy steel wheels clicked and clacked against the iron rails, the smell of burning coal and cold metal filling the passenger car. With every mile that passed, a suffocating, elaborate fiction was being constructed. The Cowell family home sat on East Gorgas Lane in the neighborhood of Roxborough. It was a sturdy, respectable-looking house with a neat lawn, projecting an aura of stability to anyone walking past on the sidewalk. But the moment the heavy front door clicked shut behind them, that decency became a prison. When the boy eventually learned to speak, the word mother would be directed at the wrong woman. His grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor, demanded he be raised as their own. The woman whose blood ran through his veins, who had carried him through the lonely winter, was introduced to him simply as his older sister. From his very first breaths, the air he took in was thick with deception. Children possess a profound instinctual sensitivity to the emotional atmosphere surrounding them. They absorb the sharp, unspoken glances, the sudden, heavy silences when someone walks into the kitchen, and the humming anxiety of the adults tasked with keeping a massive fiction alive. The gravity in the Roxborough house was dictated entirely by the shifting, unpredictable moods of the patriarch, Samuel Cowell. To the neighbors, Samuel was a pillar of the community, a deacon who kept his property immaculate. He could be seen on crisp autumn afternoons, patiently wrapping thick layers of burlap around the trunks of young dogwood trees to protect their bark from the frost. But behind closed doors, Samuel was a man ruled by explosive furies. He was an overwhelming presence who harbored volatile prejudices, frequently erupting into terrifying bouts of rage, slamming doors, and creating an environment where the very floorboards felt brittle and dangerous. The boy did not cry or throw tantrums in response to the chaos. He retreated into the corners of the living room, sitting silently on the rug, and watched. He observed how a man could be a monster inside his own home, ruling through fear, while seamlessly projecting an image of gentle perfection to the neighbors on the sidewalk. It was a silent, daily masterclass in how to divide oneself into two entirely different people, keeping the darkness safely hidden behind a pleasant smile. The first chilling evidence that this fractured environment was taking root occurred when he was just 3 years old. His Aunt Julia had lain down in her bedroom for an afternoon nap. The house was unusually quiet, filled only with the soft, ambient sounds of a suburban afternoon. The distant hum of a passing car, the slow, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway, the dust motes drifting lazily through the shafts of sunlight. After some time, she was pulled back to consciousness by the strange, primal instinct that alerts us when we are no longer alone. She opened her eyes, blinking against the dim light. Standing perfectly still at the edge of her mattress was her 3-year-old nephew. He wasn't speaking. His face was entirely devoid of emotion, an unreadable mask, save for a faint, strange smile playing on the corners of his lips. As Julia shifted her weight to sit up, she felt something cold, heavy, and metallic resting against the blankets. She looked down, and her breath caught in her throat. While she had slept, the toddler had quietly walked down the hall, opened the heavy wooden kitchen drawers, and carried back a handful of large steel butcher knives. With terrifying precision, he had meticulously arranged the blades on the bedsheets, forming a perimeter around her sleeping body, every single sharp point facing directly toward her. He stood there, in the quiet room, waiting to see her reaction. It was not a clumsy mistake. It was an experiment. It was the early, silent language of a predator, feeling the intoxicating, electric rush of holding power over a vulnerable, unconscious victim. By 1950, the atmosphere in Philadelphia had become too oppressive for Louise to endure. Seeking a fresh start, she packed her belongings and moved with her young son across the vast expanse of the country, trading the rigid row houses of Pennsylvania for the damp, towering evergreen forests of Tacoma, Washington. The Pacific Northwest was a landscape defined by its heavy, relentless rain, a place where the sky often hung low and iron grey for weeks on end, casting deep, permanent shadows through the ancient pines. The dampness seeped into the very wood of the houses. It was here, amidst the constant sound of rain on the roof, that Louise met a mild-mannered military hospital cook named Johnny Bundy. They married, and Johnny formally adopted the boy, signing the legal papers that gave the child the surname he would eventually carve into history. On paper, the child finally had a traditional nuclear family. Johnny worked hard, provided a modest working-class home, and made genuine attempts to include his new son in his life. But the psychological chasm in the boy's mind was already vast and unbridgeable. As he grew older, the fragile lie of his parentage finally shattered. The exact moment is lost to history, but the physical reality of it was undeniable. Finding the official documentation, seeing the blank space where a father's name should be, reading the undeniable proof that his sister was his mother, devastated him. but it did not send him seeking comfort. It filled the empty spaces inside him with a cold, burning resentment. He felt profoundly humiliated. His mother had spent years quietly whispering to him that he was brilliant, that he was special, and that he was destined for a life of great importance. He internalized this with a dark, grandiose sense of entitlement. Looking around the modest, cramped home in Tacoma, he felt nothing but disgust. He viewed his adoptive father not as a savior, but as an uneducated blue-collar imposter entirely beneath his intellect. He believed he was an aristocrat, a superior being unfairly trapped in the mundane life of a peasant. This towering arrogance isolated him completely. Walking the bustling, loud hallways of Woodrow Wilson High School, he was a ghost. He was painfully awkward, walking with hunched shoulders, completely incapable of understanding the everyday mechanics of human connection. The laughter by the lockers, the easy camaraderie. It was a foreign language. He could only stand on the periphery, analyzing their interactions with the cold, detached intensity of a scientist studying insects under glass. A darkness began to bleed into his solitary hours. The cruelty he harbored was patient and methodical. He spent hours alone in the damp woods behind his neighborhood, the wet earth clinging to his shoes as he dug hidden punji traps. He lined the deep pits with sharp, jagged wooden stakes, carefully camouflaging the tops with wet leaves and branches, designing them specifically to injure the neighborhood children who ran blindly through the trees. He caught a stray cat, tied it to a clothesline, and calmly, without a flicker of emotion on his face, set it on fire. He did not do it out of anger. He did it to watch the life leave its body. As his teenage years progressed, this clinical fascination with inflicting pain found a new, intoxicating outlet. The daylight exposed his awkwardness and his inability to connect, but the night offered him something entirely different. He began slipping out of his bedroom window late at night, pulling his jacket tight against the cold, and disappearing into the heavy Washington rain. He walked for miles through the quiet suburban neighborhoods, his footsteps masked by the drumming of the storm. He sought out houses where the living room curtains had been carelessly left open, or where a bedroom light cast a warm, yellow rectangle onto the wet grass outside. He would approach silently, the freezing water dripping from his hair, and stand perfectly still in the dark, his breath fogging the cold glass. He watched women. He watched them moving through their homes, folding laundry or brushing their hair before bed, standing just inches away, separated from them only by a fragile pane of glass. He experienced a profound rush of absolute power. In those silent, rainy hours, he was no longer an outcast. He was an invisible, omnipotent God, invading their most private sanctuaries without their knowledge. He owned the moment, and out there in the dark, there was absolutely zero risk of being rejected. He also discovered the thrill of taking things, breaking into parked cars and unlocked houses to acquire the physical symbols of the upper-class life he felt he deserved. Expensive snow skis, tailored clothing, cash. And when he was occasionally caught by the local police, he made an immensely empowering discovery. Sitting in the sterile, brightly lit interrogation rooms, he realized that if he looked the officer directly in the eye, spoke with a calm, highly educated cadence, and smiled the right way, he could easily manipulate them. He could project an aura of undeniable innocence. He learned that society desperately wanted to believe a handsome, clean-cut boy was inherently good. He was learning how to camouflage himself in plain sight, weaponizing trust against itself. By his 18th birthday, Standing on the threshold of adulthood, the architecture of the monster was completely finished. The foundation of deception, the profound resentment, the towering entitlement, the complete eradication of empathy, and the chilling patience to hunt in the dark had all solidified into a single, terrifying entity. The ghost of Tacoma was ready to step out of the shadows, ready to build a mask so perfect it would fool the entire world. The transition from adolescence to adulthood is, for most, a gradual awakening. It is a time of clumsy mistakes, shifting identities, and the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of leaving home. But for an 18-year-old boy, stepping onto the sprawling, rain-swept campus of the University of Washington in 1965, there was no awakening. There was only a profound, suffocating realization of everything he was not. The university was a fortress of Gothic stone and towering evergreens. In the autumn, the heavy Pacific rain turned the stone pathways slick and black, reflecting the warm, yellow glow of the library windows. Inside those grand, echoing halls walked the sons and daughters of the Pacific Northwest's elite. They moved with the casual, effortless confidence of old money. They wore heavy, tailored wool coats that smelled of cedar and expensive cologne. They spoke of summer homes on the coast, of weekend ski trips, and carried an unspoken, inherent certainty that the world had been built specifically for them. He walked among them like a ghost. The working-class poverty of his childhood in Tacoma clung to him. He was acutely aware of the frayed cuffs of his shirt, the cheap leather of his shoes, and the flat, unrefined cadence of his own voice. When he sat in the lecture halls, the mahogany desks felt cold and foreign under his hands. He did not know how to hold a tennis racket. He did not know the relaxed, arrogant posture one adopts when leaning against a bar, laughing at a joke he didn't really care about. He was an imposter, drowning in a sea of privilege, consumed by a venomous, quiet envy that burned hot in his chest. But he was a patient observer. He had spent his teenage years standing in the freezing rain, peering through the illuminated bedroom windows of strangers, learning the silent language of human behavior. He realized that the wealthy students around him were not a superior species. They were simply playing a role. They were following a script. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that he could learn the script better than any of them. He began a meticulous, exhausting process of human engineering. He haunted the local thrift stores on the forgotten edges of Seattle, running his fingers over racks of discarded clothing until he found the rich, heavy textures of the upper class. He bought second-hand blazers, silk ties, and crisp Oxford shirts, taking them back to his cramped, dimly lit room and painstakingly altering the seams until they fit his frame. With tailor-made precision, he stood in front of his bathroom mirror for hours in the dead of night. He analyzed the geometry of his own face, realizing his sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes were assets he could weaponize. He practiced smiling. It was never a genuine expression of joy, but rather a calibrated, mathematical arrangement of the lips and the narrowing of the eyes, designed specifically to project warmth, humility, and harmlessness. He bought a tape recorder and listened to the flat, working-class vowels of his own speech, slowly training his tongue to mimic the smooth, articulate, and slightly arrogant cadence of an Ivy League scholar. He was constructing a human suit, stitching it together, piece by piece. And as the mask took shape, a dark, primal hunger began to stir beneath it. The voyeurism of his high school years, The thrill of standing in the wet grass and watching women through the glass was no longer enough to sedate the rage of his inferiority. The fantasy was demanding reality. It was demanding physical proximity. In the brutal, freezing winter of 1966, a shadow fell over a quiet residential street in Seattle. On a Saturday night, two young women, Lonnie Trumbull and Joy Ayler, were asleep in their basement apartment. They were flight attendants, vibrant and independent, living the very life of freedom and mobility that he so deeply coveted and resented. The details of that night remain a chilling, unresolved whisper in the annals of true crime. But decades later, cold case investigators would look back at the geometry of the attack and see the undeniable, emerging blueprint of a monster. Sometime in the darkest hours of the early morning, while the rain lashed against the pavement outside, someone slipped into the basement apartment. The intruder did not break a window. He did not force a lock. He moved with the silent, practiced grace of a phantom who had spent years learning how to walk through the dark without making a sound. He moved through the quiet apartment, bypassing valuables, ignoring wallets and jewelry. He found his way to the bedroom where the two women slept. He carried a piece of rough lumber, likely pulled from the damp earth outside. In the pitch black of the room, standing over their sleeping bodies, the intruder unleashed a furious, devastating assault. Joy Ayler survived, though the trauma wiped her memory of the attack clean. Lonnie Trumbull did not. While he was never formally charged with the crime, the method of entry, the specific weapon of opportunity, the devastating blunt force trauma inflicted upon sleeping women, and the silent, ghost-like escape bore the unmistakable, terrifying signature of the man he was becoming. It is heavily suspected that on this rainy night in 1966, the 20-year-old student tasted blood for the first time, crossing the ultimate threshold from observer to apex predator. If the violence of that night terrified him, he never showed it. Instead, he returned to the brightly lit campus, his mask more securely fastened than ever. By the spring of 1967, the human suit was flawless. He was handsome, ambitious, and deeply charming, and he decided it was time to test his creation on a prize. Her name was Diane. She was a beautiful, sophisticated classmate from a wealthy, influential family in California. She possessed everything he had ever been denied. Long, dark hair parted cleanly down the middle, a refined, effortless wardrobe, and the unbothered grace of a woman who had never known a single moment of financial desperation. To him, Diane was not just a romantic interest. She was a symbol. She was the absolute, undeniable validation that his camouflage had worked. If he could possess her, if he could make her love him, he would finally prove that he belonged in her world. He pursued her with a calculated, breathless intensity that she mistook for passion. He mirrored her interests perfectly. He anticipated her needs, opening doors, pulling out chairs, presenting himself as the cultured, driven man her wealthy family expected her to marry. He even stole expensive ski equipment from local lodges just so he could invite her to the mountains, pretending he had been skiing his entire life. He was the perfect boyfriend because he had no actual, fixed personality of his own to get in the way. He simply reflected her desires back to her. And for a year, the illusion held. She fell in love with the reflection. But true intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires the surrender of control, and control was the only adhesive holding the fractured pieces of his mind together. As 1968 dragged on, the quiet, isolated moments of their relationship began to expose the terrifying hollowness beneath his charm. Diane began to notice the strange, vacant coldness that lingered just behind his eyes when the conversation died down. She noticed his profound lack of genuine empathy, the way he would effortlessly and smoothly lie about inconsequential things just for the thrill of deception. She felt the unsettling, possessive way he watched her, not with love, but with the cold calculation of an owner appraising property. Sensing the darkness beneath the polish and recognizing his lack of true direction, Diane graduated in the spring and returned to California. She cleanly and decisively severed the relationship. The rejection did not merely break his heart, it annihilated his entire manufactured reality. The deep, dark chasm of his narcissism collapsed inward. He was 21 years old, deeply humiliated and exposed. The peasant from Tacoma had been dismissed by the aristocracy, judged unworthy of their ranks. He dropped out of the University of Washington. The carefully constructed facade of the Ivy League scholar crumbled into dust. He stopped attending classes, retreated into his room, and allowed the darkness to consume him. The sadness quickly evaporated, burning away into a cold, diamond-hard fury that would forever alter the landscape of the country. He realized that if he could not join the elite, he would destroy them. He would take their brightest, most beautiful daughters, and he would completely dominate them in the dark. Driven by a restless, chaotic energy, he began to travel. In the summer of 1969, he journeyed east, returning to the geographical roots of his traumatic childhood. He spent time in Philadelphia, briefly attending classes at Temple University, walking the same humid, brick-lined streets where his grandfather had once ruled with explosive violence. It was during this time on the East Coast that another terrifying, unsolved horror unfolded, one that investigators have long suspected was the work of his hands. It was Memorial Day weekend in Ocean City, New Jersey. The Atlantic Ocean crashed heavily against the shoreline, carrying the thick, salty smell of sea foam and seaweed. Two 19-year-old college students, Susan Davis and Elizabeth Perry, were enjoying a vacation at the shore. They were vibrant, intelligent young women, full of life and promise. Early on a Tuesday morning, they walked down to the beach to watch the sunrise. The sand was cold and damp, the morning fog rolling in thick and heavy off the grey water, completely obscuring the coastline and muffling the sound of the crashing waves. They were never seen alive again. 3 days later, their bodies were discovered, hidden deep in the dense, towering foliage of the sand dunes, far from the public boardwalk. They had been brutally stabbed to death. While the weapon was different from his later confirmed crimes, the geography of the attack raised profound suspicions. The killer had approached two young, beautiful women in a remote, isolating environment. He had gained their trust, or at least managed to approach them without causing an immediate panic, before unleashing a sudden, overwhelming violence. He then took the time to meticulously hide their bodies in the natural landscape, a signature that would become the hallmark of his terror in the Pacific Northwest. He was in the area. He matched the description of a handsome, clean-cut young man seen talking to the girls earlier in the weekend. But the evidence was circumstantial, washed away by the tides and the passing of time. He would later drop cryptic hints to investigators before his execution, refusing to confirm or deny his presence on that foggy New Jersey beach, preferring to keep the power of the secret entirely for himself. By the autumn of 1969, the Phantom had returned to the Pacific Northwest. He was 22 years old, deeply broken, and carrying secrets that would shatter the minds of ordinary men. But a predator cannot survive in the wild forever. The mask had to be rebuilt, and this time, he did not seek an equal. He sought a harbor. He needed a place to anchor his manufactured reality, a flawless alibi of domestic normality. On a rainy night in October, he walked into the Sandpiper Tavern in Seattle. The bar was dimly lit, smelling of stale beer and damp wool coats. Sitting at a table was a young woman named Elizabeth. She was a single mother, working as a secretary at the university to support her young daughter. She was lonely, deeply insecure, dealing with her own quiet struggles with alcohol, and desperately looking for stability. She was the perfect mark. He approached her, turning on the high beam headlights of his charm. He was handsome, attentive, and incredibly polite. To Elizabeth, he felt like a sudden, unexpected miracle. He didn't seem to mind that she had a child. In fact, he embraced it. The reality of their life together over the next 5 years was a bizarre, deeply unsettling psychological horror. It was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. By day, he played the role of the devoted, loving family man with terrifying conviction. Picture the surreal domesticity of his life in the early 1970s. It is a Sunday morning. The rain is falling gently outside the windows of Elizabeth's small, warm house. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee fills the kitchen. He is standing at the stove, wearing a comfortable sweater, gently flipping pancakes, and laughing at a joke. He sits at the small dining table, patiently helping Elizabeth's young daughter with her coloring books. In the evenings, he reads her bedtime stories, adjusting the pitch of his voice for the different characters. He gently tucks the little girl into bed, kisses her forehead, and theatrically checks the closet and under the bed for monsters, promising her she is safe. He was the ultimate protector. But the monster was not in the closet. The monster was sitting on the edge of the mattress, reading the story. While Elizabeth fell deeply, hopelessly in love with the gentle man who fixed her car, bought her flowers, and cooked her dinner, his internal world was rotting at an accelerated pace. The domestic bliss was a suffocating theatre. When Elizabeth and her daughter went to sleep, breathing softly in the quiet house, the mask would slowly slide off his face in the dark. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold, familiar fury rising in his blood. He would quietly slip out from under the covers, making sure not to disturb the mattress. He would dress in dark, unassuming clothes, grab his car keys, and slip out the front door into the freezing Seattle night. He would drive his beige Volkswagen Beetle down from the quiet residential hills and into the university district. He was no longer the devoted boyfriend. He was the Phantom. He began to actively stalk the dark, rain-slicked streets. Imagine a young college student walking home alone from a late-night study session. The streetlights cast long, distorted yellow shadows across the wet concrete. She pulls her coat tighter around her shivering shoulders, her head down against the biting wind. And then, she hears it. The faint, rhythmic splash of footsteps on the wet pavement, 30 yards behind her. She quickens her pace. The footsteps match her speed. The human brain is hardwired for survival. It recognizes the presence of an apex predator, long before the conscious mind can process it. A cold knot of absolute dread tightens in the young woman's stomach. The air feels suddenly heavier. thick with an unseen malice. She clenches her keys between her knuckles, her breath coming in shallow, terrified gasps, her eyes desperately scanning the dark houses for an illuminated porch light, a sign of sanctuary. A dozen yards behind her, matching her terror step for step, is Theodore. He is not wearing a frightening mask. His hair is perfectly combed. His heart rate is incredibly, unnaturally slow. He watches the tension in her shoulders. He smells the ozone of the rain and the faint, sweet scent of her shampoo mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of her fear. He is inside her head, anticipating her panic, savoring the absolute control he holds over her life in this dark corridor of the city. He could close the distance in 3 seconds. He could reach out, cover her mouth, and drag her into the suffocating darkness of the alleyway. The power is intoxicating. It is a godlike high, a narcotic rush that entirely erases the humiliated, rejected boy from Tacoma. During these years, he was endlessly rehearsing. He was learning the geography of fear. On most nights, as the terrified women broke into a frantic run and reached the safety of a brightly lit intersection, he would simply stop. He would stand in the shadows, the rain soaking his shoulders, a cold smile pulling at his lips, and watch them run away. He didn't take them. He was proving to himself that he could. He was perfecting his hunting techniques, learning the patrol routes of the local police, understanding how to move through an environment without leaving a single trace. And then, his adrenaline slowly subsiding, he would drive back to Elizabeth's house. He would quietly unlock the front door, slip out of his wet clothes, and crawl back into bed beside her, wrapping his arms around her warm, sleeping body. The duality was seamless. He had completely partitioned his mind. To further embed himself in the fabric of unquestionable decency, and to satisfy his dark fascination with the mechanics of the mind, he returned to the University of Washington, enrolling in a psychology program. He learned the clinical vocabulary of trauma and manipulation, and in a twist of profound, unbearable irony, he began volunteering at the Seattle Crisis Clinic in 1971. Picture the scene. It is 3 o'clock in the morning. The fluorescent lights overhead are humming a low, steady electric buzz. The rain is lashing aggressively against the darkened windows of the clinic. The phones are ringing constantly, carrying the desperate, weeping voices of people who are standing on the absolute edge of life and death. Sitting at a metal desk, holding a heavy black rotary phone to his ear, is the predator. His voice is a low, soothing purr. He is speaking to a woman on the other end of the line, a woman who is holding a bottle of pills, deciding whether or not to end her life. He listens to her cry. He holds her life entirely in his hands. He could push her over the edge with a single cruel sentence, or he could pull her back into the light. The power is absolute, and he wields it flawlessly. "You matter," he tells her, his voice dripping with manufactured empathy. "The world is a safe place. Lock your doors and wait for the sun to rise." Sitting just a few desks away is Anne Rule, a former police officer and future best-selling true crime author. She is a woman trained to spot criminals, trained to read the subtle tells of a liar. But when she looks over at the handsome young psychology student, she sees an angel of mercy. She sees a young man so kind, so profoundly empathetic, that when their shift ends in the pitch black of the early morning, she frequently asks him to walk her through the empty parking lot. She trusts him to protect her from the dangerous men who hide in the shadows. He would walk her safely to her car, He would smile warmly, wish her a good night, wait until her headlights disappeared into the rainy street, and then he would step back into the dark. By the time he turned 25, the camouflage was impenetrable. He had a beautiful girlfriend, a surrogate daughter, a burgeoning political career, and the absolute trust of law enforcement professionals. The ghost of Tacoma had built the ultimate fortress. And from within that fortress, the terrible hunger inside him was finally, permanently ready to be unleashed upon the world. There is a terrifying threshold in the life cycle of every apex predator. It is the invisible line in the sand where rehearsal ends and reality begins. For years, the Phantom of the Pacific Northwest had been practicing in the shadows. He had stalked the wet, rain-slicked streets of Seattle, watching young women through the illuminated glass of their bedroom windows. He had learned the precise, biological mechanics of human fear. He had painstakingly perfected a mask. The charming, articulate psychology student, the devoted boyfriend, the rising Republican political star. By the time he reached his 25th birthday in the autumn of 1971, the architecture of the monster was completely finished. He had built the ultimate human suit, but a machine designed for hunting cannot remain idle indefinitely. The pressure inside him was building, a dark, churning, subterranean rage that could no longer be satisfied by merely standing in the wet grass and watching. To understand the absolute, chilling cognitive dissonance of his life during these years, we have to look at the spaces he occupied in the daylight. Imagine the Seattle Crisis Clinic in the dead of night. It is November 1971. The fluorescent lights overhead hum with a low, steady electric buzz that makes the eyes ache. Outside, the unrelenting Washington rain is lashing against the darkened window panes, blurring the city lights into smeared streaks of yellow and red. The phones in the clinic are ringing, a constant, urgent chorus carrying the desperate, weeping voices of people standing on the absolute edge of life and death. Sitting at a cold metal desk, holding a heavy black rotary phone to his ear, is the predator. He is 25 years old. His hair is neatly parted, his collar crisp. His voice is a low, soothing purr, pitched perfectly to convey deep, unconditional empathy. He is speaking to a woman on the other end of the line who is holding a bottle of sleeping pills, deciding whether or not to end her life. He listens to her cry. In this moment, he holds her existence entirely in his hands. He could push her over the edge, into the abyss, with a single, carefully placed, cruel sentence. Or he could pull her back into the light. The power is absolute, and he wields it flawlessly. "You matter," he tells her, his voice dripping with manufactured compassion. "The world is a safe place. I want you to lock your doors, turn on the lights, and just wait for the sun to rise. I am right here with you." Sitting just a few desks away in the dim room is Anne Rule. She is a former police officer, a woman trained to spot criminals, trained to read the subtle, involuntary tells of a liar. But when she looks over at her handsome young co-worker, she does not see a psychopath. She sees an angel of mercy. She sees a young man so kind, so profoundly attuned to the suffering of others, that when their shift ends in the pitch black of the early morning, she frequently asks him to walk her through the empty, rain-swept parking lot. She trusts him to protect her from the dangerous men who hide in the shadows. He would walk her safely to her car. He would smile warmly, wish her a good night, wait patiently until her taillights disappeared into the rainy street, and then he would step back into the dark. He would drive his beige Volkswagen Beetle back to the modest, quiet home of his girlfriend, Elizabeth. He would quietly turn the key in the lock, take off his wet shoes, and slip into bed beside her. The domestic theatre of his life with Elizabeth was suffocating, yet entirely necessary. It was his anchor to the world of the sane. Picture the surreal normality of a Sunday morning in 1972. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee fills Elizabeth's small, warm kitchen. He is standing at the stove, wearing a comfortable sweater, gently flipping pancakes and laughing at a joke. He sits at the small dining table, patiently helping Elizabeth's young daughter with her colouring books. In the evenings, he reads her bedtime stories, adjusting the pitch of his voice for the different characters. He gently tucks the little girl into bed, kisses her forehead, and theatrically checks the closet and under the bed for monsters, promising her she is safe. He was the ultimate protector. But the monster was not in the closet. The monster was sitting on the edge of the mattress, reading the story. As 1972 bled into 1973, the internal rot accelerated. The pressure of maintaining the political campaigns, the law school applications, and the flawless boyfriend routine was exhausting. The rage demanded an outlet. During this time, the damp, sprawling forests of the Pacific Northwest began to keep secrets. Young women, hitchhikers on lonely stretches of coastal highways, college students walking home alone from parties, began to vanish. Their disappearances were scattered, unlinked by local police departments, who rarely communicated with one another. A girl missing in Olympia, another vanishing near Corvallis. Decades later, cold case investigators would map these early, suspected disappearances, tracing a chilling, invisible web across the region. While unconfirmed, those who study the pathology of the killer believed these years were the quiet, brutal testing ground. He was learning how to dispose of evidence. He was learning how quickly the damp earth could swallow a secret. But the phantom was growing arrogant. The shadows were no longer enough. He wanted to hunt closer to home. The year 1974 arrived in Seattle with a bitter, freezing winter. The heavy rains turned to snow, blanketing the university district in a pristine, blinding white. The air was sharp and cold, forcing people to hurry through the streets with their heads down, completely oblivious to their surroundings. On the night of January 4th, 1974, an 18-year-old student named Karen Sparks was asleep in her basement apartment. She lived in a house shared with several roommates. The doors were locked. The house was quiet. Sometime after midnight, the phantom arrived. He did not pick the lock. He systematically dismantled the frame of her bedroom window, moving with the silent, practiced grace of a ghost. He slipped into her dark room. He found a heavy metal rod from her own bed frame. Standing over her sleeping body, he unleashed the furious, pent-up rage of a lifetime. The assault was devastating, silent, and horrifically violent. Karen Sparks survived, though she remained in a coma for weeks. Her memory of the attack permanently erased by the trauma. The police were baffled. There was no forced entry that would alert the house. No screams heard by the roommates sleeping just on the other side of the wall. 27 days later, the phantom struck again. And this time, he perfected the silence. Linda Ann Healy was 21 years old. She was a beautiful, vibrant psychology major, known across campus for her bright smile and her daily broadcast of the ski reports on a local radio station. On the evening of January 31st, she went to sleep in her basement bedroom, locking the heavy wooden door behind her. When her roommates woke up the next morning, the house was entirely undisturbed. But Linda did not emerge for her morning broadcast. When they finally forced open her locked door, they stepped into a nightmare that defied all physics. Linda was gone. The bed had been neatly made. Too neatly. When the police pulled back the heavy comforter, the sheets beneath were soaked in blood. Her nightgown hung in the closet, stained dark crimson around the collar. Her backpack, keys, and wallet were sitting on her desk. There were no footprints in the snow outside her window. How does a man walk into a locked house full of people, brutalize a woman, carry her unconscious body out into the freezing night, and lock the door behind him, all in absolute, perfect silence? With Linda Ann Healy, the threshold was officially crossed. The era of the stalker was over. The reign of the serial killer had begun. As for now, the rain continues its gentle, rhythmic drumming against the glass. A soft, steady pulse that gradually quiets the world. The story of the phantom is deep, dark, and complex. And for now, the chapter closes here. Take another deep, slow breath, letting the tension in the chest dissolve into the stillness of the room. The night is quiet. The shadows are harmless. And the only thing left to do is let the mind drift into the warmth of the mattress. Rest now. Sleep well.